Welcome to the Invested Teacher Podcast with Cal Pearce, Matt Bigley, and John Orr.
Get ready to be taught as we share our successes and, most importantly, our failures encountered during our real-life lessons, learning how to build generational wealth from the ground up.
Welcome, Invested students, to another episode of the Invested Teacher Podcast, where we help you build your wealth. And hey, we're here to talk all things about your finances and where you're putting your money and how you're choosing to invest in those, in certain products, and who represents you, I guess, is kind of like one of the big the big themes we're going to talk about today, and thinking about, I guess a story about myself is that, when I first kind of got my first job, and you got all your paychecks coming in, and
corn to tasseling.
What was it? No, I worked at Home Depot, and I pushed carts for a long time. But I guess I'm talking about my first career, which is when I became a teacher, and I moved back to the country. I taught overseas in the Caribbean for my first couple of years. But when I came back with my wife, and, we moved to the area where she's from, because we don't live in the area where I'm from, which is around Kingston, Ontario. We live, close to Windsor. And my wife's parents heavily, own farms, have had a lot of investments, and we've talked about my history on the past with my parents, and my experience with finances was very little, mostly because I think my parents relied heavily on their pensions, not a lot of discussion about investing or planning for wealth building. So when I moved to this area with my in-laws, and being 24 years old, 25 years old, my in-laws were like, we got to get you set up with your financial advisor, and so we drove to their bank. We drove to RBC. We drove to that bank that says, like, this is your personal financial advisor. And so I was like, that's amazing. I have a financial advisor. And so I trusted this financial advisor in everything I did. And then, later on, fast forward, 15 years, 10 years, and I know I'm talking about my financing with you, Kyle. And we come to realize, I think my financial advisor was doing the best job they could as long as I chose products from that bank.
So true. And actually, this came up in a recent call with an invested student where, they were seeking some different ways, like, to get into real estate, and they were interested in infinite banking, which, and everyone listening knows, like, I'm a massive fan of. I'm, probably obsessed. I get obsessed with things when I'm really, really interested and intrigued by them. So we got into a great discussion. Then it sort of landed back where you're describing your experience, John, where, this person actually has, I'm going to say a fairly significant amount of capital with their quote unquote investment advisor. And that investment advisor is at one of these big banks. And here in Canada, we have the big banks, and oftentimes, a large percentage of the population has checking accounts and so on, savings accounts, maybe even mortgages through these big banks. And then they offer financial services. But the part that people often miss is that when they sit down with these advisors, and like you said, John, I think you nailed it, is like they're doing the best they can given what they know, what they understand, and also what they're able to do. And that is sort of the big piece that we wanted to share today with the audience, is that when you're working with a big bank, you are essentially being helped within a bubble. And there are options in that bubble. So don't get me wrong that there aren't options for you, and that there's probably this product over here is a lot better for you than maybe this product over here based on the needs analysis they might do with you. But ultimately, at the end of the day, you are limited to their own little bubble. And you'll notice that never once have you had a discussion or at least at depth as to how maybe real estate might impact your portfolio, unless it was a REIT, which is offered in their little bubble, right? So, and I'm not going to pick, I'm going to call ABC Bank because I don't want us to get in any trouble here. Let's pretend ABC Bank There's actually a bank that does have 3 letters in its name, but they're different letters, so we're not going to say it. You sit down at ABC Bank, and that investment advisor, I remember having this discussion. I went in, my sister actually asked me to come in because she had this, she had an investment meeting. They had this regular meeting. They're trying to get you to come in so they can continue the relationship. So, know, like, and trust, and all of the things that are important with any sort of relationship, but especially in business and investing. And she's like, I really don't know if this is the best fit for me. And she was talking about real estate at the time. She was interested in real estate. So when I came into the meeting, I asked a bunch of questions. I tried to be very coach-like. So I was just asking questions. I wasn't stating anything. I didn't come in and try to puff my chest and say, I do this or I do that. I really just wanted to come in and sort of get a sense as to what was being offered. And my sister had said, I'm interested in purchasing a investment property. And this particular person actually sort of went down the script of the risk, and kind of almost let's not go here. And what would be a lot safer, which actually they're not lying. What would be safer is maybe a REIT, REIT, which is like a fund of real estate investments. But obviously the returns are lower, the fees are higher, and it's actually a REIT from that particular bank. So that bank has kind of put together that fund, which they've selected, and so on and so forth, which also makes them a lot of money on the other end. So ultimately, at the end of the day, is it better than, say, blindly investing your money? Absolutely. But I would argue, and I think the purpose of this episode here today is that if you are listening to this episode, you're someone who could probably be better served by opening and expanding outside of that bubble. People who are stuck in that bubble and are happy and well served in that bubble are actually probably not listening to this episode, and therefore that might be their best option, right? Because it would be easy for me to go in and say, hey, talk to this person over here and say, you know what, you shouldn't be investing with the big bank because their fees are high and you can do better over here and here and here. But ultimately, at the end of the day, if they don't know what it is that they're doing and they really don't want to have anything to do with the decision-making process, then maybe the fees and the lower returns is worth their time and effort. However, you're listening to a podcast where we talk about investment, real estate, interesting creative strategies. So that would suggest to me that anyone listening to this podcast, if you have funds with a big bank, that's probably your first step before you go try to find an investment property, or before you try the infinite banking, process, or you try, the Smith maneuver, like any of these other things we're talking about. It's like, hey, let's take care of the easy thing, which is learning about what the bank is actually doing, why it might not be a good fit for you, and what you might consider doing instead. You notice the big might there, because if you're willing to do the work, there's definitely better options and higher returns and less on the expense side, that are really, I would say, minutes away from you. Yeah. So that's what we're going to dig into here today.
Yeah. And I find that interesting in this scenario about your sister with, that particular salesman. I guess I'll kind of use that term.
Salesperson.
When we think they're financial advisors or financial planners, when she suggested real estate as an investment option, I'm really surprised that person didn't pivot immediately and think this is a great option because we can provide you a mortgage, when the time is right. And we have that product over here, right? And so maybe there was some sort of incentive to stick, with the investing side of options, like the stock market or mutual funds. Maybe this particular person had a vested interest, and that's one of the kind of the big issues when you're working with your bank. We just read an article from the Globe and Mail titled "Persuasive Sales Culture at Canadian Banks Designed to Push Customers into High Fee Products," and the big banks have been basically systematizing the process for the people that you think are your financial advisors, but they have been given huge incentives. Often their pay structure is built upon the commissions, almost sometimes at 100% commission, to get you to buy their product. And I think normally, like like we would think that that's okay or part of, our world. But I think we, here in Canada, we have been heavily in the past relying on our big banks to be our trustworthy advisors, and all of a sudden, it kind of comes out that it says, like, for 2 decades now, the big banks have been kind of changing policies to incentivize the commission and to keep people buying their products. Like, I know that even if you went into your online banking, if you had mutual funds set up in there, you can see your investments, you may find it tough to kind of like choose a product on the self-serve side of things that is not one of your big bank products. And that's because they're pushing that commission structure. So I think, Kyle, one of the, I think you brought up one of the big takeaways for sure already is to think about, like, okay, I have a lot of my products, and we were saying products, we have a lot of our investments at one of the big banks. Should I think about who is serving me and the purpose of those choices that I've made? Is a mutual fund the best thing for me? Do I want that managed fund, or could I get a better return, or maybe I have a better option by going to a direct investing account, and I can choose maybe one of the index funds, ETFs, that can kind of do the same thing for me, and I don't have to pay those fees. Or am I happy with, like what you said, maybe I'm just happy with having it all be managed under the same umbrella. We have to make those decisions, right? Like, we have to say, what is the right thing for me? What is the right option for me? And I think the biggest takeaway I've learned in the last couple of years, 5-10 years, is that there are other options than just sticking with, your big bank that you've done banking with this whole time.
Absolutely. And, I think, again, we're speaking to an interesting audience here. This isn't your everyday audience. Like, what I would say first and foremost is, if you're listening to this podcast and you haven't been putting money into some sort of investment vehicle, then your first step probably is just go to your big bank and say, listen, I got to start this thing, right? Just get it going. You can always move it later. But again, those who are listening, I'm going to guess that you have investments going on in some way, shape, or form. It's not the first time you've thought about investing. You've probably, understood that, hey, like, the rule of thumb is like 10% of your income should be paying yourself, or like paying into an investment. I would argue, if you can stretch that even further, right? Like, live under your means if possible and put more money in there, and just get that going if you haven't yet. Because again, your big bank, it's not like they're going to like steal from you. Some people, I've seen articles where they say like your investment advisor stealing from you. It's like, okay, we're going a little far there. Right. They need to be paid for what they're doing. The one thing though that I think is really important is that we need to understand what it is we're doing and what we're getting. So for example, if I'm going in blind to the bank, I feel like if you go in blind and your bank is taking care of everything for you, they're providing a service. The part I don't like, and you've already articulated from this particular article, is that it feels like they're intentionally hiding some of the story. Right. And I want to talk about you and mortgages, John, because, right. You have your mortgage license and you do mortgages, and, you're a math teacher. You love numbers. And, it's sort of like for you, it's like a little game for you that you get to play to try to help people find the best opportunities for them. And it's not always rate. But the thing is, you get paid based on the mortgage amount through a commission. And actually, there are some lenders that pay a higher commission than others. Right. And the reality, though, is I think being open and honest with people about that is really important. And it shouldn't be all about, so on the buyer side, or on the person who's going to receive the funding from this mortgage, it shouldn't be about them making sure that you're getting the lowest commission. And it shouldn't necessarily be about them getting the lowest rate. It should be about all of the other factors, right? There's prepayment penalties, there's flexibility, there's length of term. There's so many other things to consider. And I think when you're open and honest about how that's happening, I think there's something really important to be said about that. And that, you know what, there are going to be times where you're going to be compensated more because you use this product. But the goal is, the moral compass side of things is because that's the right product for that particular individual. And whereas at the bank, it's almost like a lot of this is hidden. It's like swept under the rug.
Yeah.
And, I want to reference our book list for a second over at investedteacher.com/books. In the stock investing section, you're going to see 2 books there that for anyone who is, let's say, dealing with, maybe they have an RRSP, maybe they have a tax-free savings account, maybe they have their own unregistered account at their bank. And this is true in the US, 401k, IRA, whatever it is that you're investing in. If you're going through your financial advisor through a product that's offered through their company, which again, if you're at ABC Bank, you're getting probably, like you said, that ABC mutual fund, the balanced ABC mutual fund, the high growth ABC, the Canadian market, the US, whatever, all of those things. They have high fees. And in reality, oftentimes the fund itself underperforms the actual market, right? So this is something that's really interesting. So not only are you losing on the fee side, but you're actually losing on the performance side as well. So basically you've got stock pickers, right? So the ABC Corporation in downtown Toronto, or, if it's in the US, it's at, in New York City on Wall Street. They're sitting there trying to manage this fund, right? So again, they're not ripping you off. They need to be paid to do this work. But the problem is that there's other funds that do this same thing that can help you achieve the same goal with a much lower expense ratio. And it actually does what the market does because it is the market. So we're going to talk a little bit about what we call index funds, which are available and they're open for anyone to purchase at any institution. So, okay, ABC Bank, if that person is listening right now, they're like, please don't tell them this, but you have access to purchase these index funds, which again, the fees are fractions of the cost. So oftentimes it's 2% or more for a mutual fund. If you think about that, 2% doesn't seem like a lot. But if, let's say, you had a $100,000 portfolio and every year, 2% of that portfolio, we're going to assume the portfolio didn't grow at all. It was just the stock market went zero for the next 10 years. That's $2,000 this year. That's $2,000 next year. That's $2,000 the years after that. So when you do that over and over and over again, and imagine if your portfolio keeps growing, which you hope it does over time, that 2,000 turns into 2,500. It turns into 3,000. It turns into larger numbers. Whereas many of these index funds have a fee of less than 1%, right? So you are getting you're paying more than double the fees in most of these mutual funds when you could actually be better at meeting the market expectation in an index fund and pay less fees. And you're essentially have the flexibility to just, again, stick almost do it blindly, but just knowing that simple fact can be a massive, massive advantage for you where your portfolio can gain a massive amount over time. So I didn't say the 2 books. On the book list, we have, what's his name? Ramit Sethi, who also has a Netflix program right now, which is worth checking out. His book is called I Will Teach You to Be Rich. He is super simple. Again, we love a lot of what he says. I think his audience is more for let's say the people we're talking about here. You went to your bank and you just sort of blindly followed. In his book, he talks about index funds and how you can still make it super hands-off and do really well. And then the second book, John, you want to guess what the book is? I don't know. I'm putting you on the spot, but
you are.
I feel like you read this book. You know this book.
Oh, Rule 1 Investing?
Oh, you would think so. I think that's further down the line. So Rule 1 Investing, true. I love that book, but that would be more involved. I'm going to say The Millionaire Teacher. And the reason why is because not only we're the invested teacher, but this particular teacher basically, goes through, he is a teacher, which resonated with us, but then basically used index funds as his primary investment strategy. So he had instead of one. Yeah, go ahead.
I was just going to say his investing strategy was obviously very intuitive when you think about it in hindsight, by saying, we're gonna buy low, sell high, but he was continually investing and depositing regular payments into these ETFs, and he did a
Dollar
combination.
cost averaging.
Yes, and he was doing a combination of ETFs for equities, so individual
What's
companies.
an ETF, John?
So an exchange traded fund. So this is like our index fund. So this is one that's kind of that fund that you were just mentioning, Kyle. It's not a managed fund. It's not a fund that's someone on the back end is trying to figure out, which is the best one to slot in here and which one is the slot in here. So for example, one of the S&P 500 index funds is like the top 500 companies. It automatically switches out based off some criteria, and he was continually, regularly putting money into that account, which is those companies, over time, with a strategy that when the market was rising, he was actually putting less and less into that side of things, like those companies, like that domain, and he was then switching his strategy to start purchasing bonds, and he was buying more bonds when we were in a high kind of markets were at the high points of the year, and then when the markets kind of tipped and went down, he starts to change that strategy. So he's like continually doing the dollar cost averaging, but buying when markets are going down, and buying equities when markets are going down, buying stocks when the equities are going, or buying bonds when the equity is going up. So that's an interesting strategy that he took over a number of years that basically made him a millionaire.
I love it. And actually, it's funny. I might need to go back to that. I feel like it's probably been 10 years since I've read that book. I might even argue like a couple years ago, I might have thought like, I'm beyond that book. But the reality is oftentimes it's the simplest strategies which will end up paying off, and that consistency, just like you said. So it's like, even though we love looking into real estate deals, we've been using, strategies through our whole life policies, right? Through the investment, infinite banking idea. I'm going to say idea because we use it very differently than say Nelson Nash would articulate. But it also makes me think, it's like when I go back to thinking about things like that, even if you weren't interested in following the market and seeing even if you didn't, go less into growth as the market's increasing and start going into bonds, like even if you just stayed consistent, just 100% consistent, you're going to do so well in the long run. And basically, like the part that I think is really interesting when I'm chatting with different invested students about whole life policies, the interesting part that I think is helpful is not only is it like a clear winner for anyone who wants to invest in real estate, because you're building up essentially a opportunity fund for you to be able to get a loan against when you need a down payment, and then you take your cash flow and pay that back. But the same can be true for dollar cost averaging. So something that is really interesting to me is like how many Canadians and US investors are out there who are trying to maximize their tax advantaged accounts, right? So again, IRA, 401k, tax-free savings account. Tax-free savings account, maybe this particular strategy wouldn't apply to, but an RSP, for example. When you invest, and I'll use an RSP as an example, in your retirement account, a lot of people will put money in there with this idea that they're going to get a refund on their tax, their income tax back at the end of the year. And that's fantastic. Imagine if before you do that, you were to open up a infinite banking policy, and you were to, and a whole life policy, as we're a properly structured whole life policy. That's a very big, important difference or nuance. You open that up and you start putting the money that you were going to put towards your RSP. I would recommend doing a little bit more. And then you were to leverage the cash value of your insurance policy to put into your RSP right near the deadline. And then when you get your tax refund, you take that refund and put it right back onto the quote unquote loan of your infinite bank policy. A lot of people do this with like a line of credit, right? Their banks might even suggest it, and they say, hey, listen, why don't you just take out a loan and then you'll pay it back over X number of months. Well, imagine if at the end it wasn't just a loan that got paid off and you move along, but you actually had this other asset growing while you're dollar cost averaging over here. Oh my gosh. I wish that someone would have helped shine the light on not only the whole life policy perspective, but also how we can leverage some of these tools in a safe way so that in the long run, right? It's like at the end of the day, you look at your bank account, it's going to look pretty much the same, but your investments are going to grow in a much, much bigger, better, more robust way.
Yeah, that is some great tips, especially if you are, if you feel like you are of the mindset that you want to, you think you can go this alone. You think you can be like, you know what, I can take a hold of my financial strategies, my financial future. This is probably, you're listening to this podcast for that exact reason, that you're looking to kind of like do more of that and be more educated in that field. So that makes a lot of sense. Now, if you are also, or know people who need a little bit of guidance along the way, then you're probably that person who's looking for, wait a minute, should I go to the banks to kind of do these products? Remember that, the banks might not have my best interest at heart or have my best interest in mind when recommending me products. So where do I go now if I don't want to, or have the time or have the capability, or if maybe my in-laws don't have that capability, that they want to like, oh wait, I'm convinced I shouldn't go over there, but where do I go here? So now we're like in the land of like, well, where's my substitute? If I can't be trusted, or I don't trust myself yet to go down that line, but I want to get out of this, is there like a middle ground now? Like, do I have trusted advisors? So this is like where your personal financial advisors are coming into play, where they're supposed to have your best interest at heart or in mind when recommending you products. Like, they're supposed to be your unbiased representative. When you're getting your mortgage broker is your unbiased representative to look at different banks and different lenders to bring you the right product for the right move, your right situation. And I think when you're looking at, like, similar to a realtor, right? A realtor, when you're going to shop for homes, like Matt right now, he's out, helping people understand their situation and finding them the right home for who they are, so that they're happy, not just this year, not just next year, but for the rest of the time that they're going to own a home. He's an unbiased representative for that buyer and also for that seller, finding the right combination here. And I think that's what you want to look for when you need that guidance, or that kind of trusted partner, is you want someone who is going to not only just give you the best rate, give you the best product, tell you exactly like this is the best thing on the market right now, and not consider who you are as a person, who you are as a family member, who you are as thinking about the future. You want to someone who is going to be with you for a long time. So you want to pick the right person. You want to think about a few things. Like, obviously we've talked about fee structures, and not just picking someone who's going to charge you the lowest. It's someone who is thinking long term. And you can ask them, like, how do you get paid? Do you get paid by commission? Do you get paid from me? Like, do I pay you directly? It's like some financial advisors get paid by commission, but some financial advisors charge you a flat rate. And therefore, it's almost like, hey, if I pay a flat rate, I know you're not making money off that product or that product or that product. Then I know that you're, say, representing me in a more straightforward way. You want to talk about, like, availability. Like, this person is here when you need them. I think that's a really important thing too. Like, these are the things you want to ask folks who are going to be your advisors or help you along this financial journey. And I guess the big thing there is you're choosing someone that has your best interests at heart and not others.
Yeah, I love that. And what it reminds me of, John, is there's, you and I both being math teachers for the vast majority of our, adult lives, and really being passionate about it, right? Like, one thing about you, me, and Matt is that we are like, we go all in when we do anything, right? And one thing in the math classroom that you and I really did was like, we want our students, it wasn't about them doing well on tomorrow's test, because you can get around that by like cramming, right? Like you can memorize stuff and like encourage them to, just know the stuff for tomorrow. And then, it's probably they'll forget about it a couple weeks later. And maybe some people are listening and remember math class being that way for them, right? That's sort of like the easy strategy to get over the immediate hurdle, but not necessarily solve the longer term problem. And, you and I were all about how do we help the students understand the math so that they actually could use it to build on when they get to the next stage in the journey. And the same is true for investing. The same is true for your finances. The same is true for anything in life, is that, it's not about, hey, someone gets on the phone with you, John, and says, hey, I need a mortgage. And you go, hey, I got the right one. Here's the lowest rate. And here's, blah, blah, blah. This is what you need. Let's just get it done. That could work. But the reality is that that person actually doesn't understand why they got it, which means when it happens again, or when they need something, or when it doesn't work out the way they thought it was going to work out, there's a lot of problems that are ensued. So it's all about, the big thing, not just knowing, liking, and trusting the person you're working with, but also having someone who's willing to spend the time with you to understand. Now, there's two-way street there. First off is that person's going to listen to you and ask you question after question after question so that they understand. And then from there, you can engage in a meaningful conversation to discuss what might be a good fit, as well as some of the things that might not be a good fit. When you explain what might not be a good fit, sometimes there's more information that you are, you hear about, and they go, oh, actually, I forgot to mention this, this, and this.
Totally.
Which then might put that in the running as the thing you might consider doing. So all this to say is like making sure that whoever you're working with, that you feel like when you're coming in, that they're asking enough about you to learn and get a true understanding of who you are and what your situation is. And then are they taking the time to actually articulate why they think what they think? So I'm going to go back to ABC Bank. Are they actually unpacking why the funds they've selected for you make sense, and which funds have they talked about wouldn't make sense? I'm going to guarantee that they didn't grab an index fund or an ETF and saying, here's why we wouldn't suggest that you go into this index fund or this ETF with the lower fees and better returns on essentially the same asset class, because it's actually not it's actually not a poor choice for you. It's actually a better choice. So the final thing that I want to mention here, and then I'm going to get off my soapbox, John, is this one. I think whoever you're working with, be it real estate, be it mortgages, be it insurance, be it going to your bank and talking to an investment advisor, are they walking the walk? So what I mean by that is that if I went and I met Matt at a property, Matt's at a showing right now, which is why he's not with us today. He's showing, or he's actually listing a property. And that person has decided to list the property with Matt and Doris. And Matt's there. And if that property owner said, Matt, do you own a home? And if Matt said, actually, no, I don't, I feel like that person might not be as confident in going with Matt, thinking you don't even own a home, let alone many homes, right? It's what are you doing in this industry? Now, we could do the same thing in the mortgage world, is hey, John, you're helping people get mortgages, and you're telling me why this one might be a good fit and why this one might not. I'm wondering, John, have you ever had a mortgage? And of course, eventually you hope to not have a mortgage. So, you might not have one now. But ultimately, you're actually, I have I have many mortgages, and here's why. Because I want to leverage my asset, my capital, and I want to continue investing. So it's like, and the crazy part is you could even show one of the mortgages on, for example, on Main Street. One of our mortgages, the rate's not optimal on that. And there's a reason why, and you can explain why the rate actually wasn't the key for that particular property, and we went for other purposes there. And then finally, I want to go all the way to the banker at ABC Bank. The one thing that I'm always encouraging people to think about and maybe talk to their advisor about is to ask them about their investment situation. And now in some cases they might say, actually, yeah, I have this same mutual fund, and but ultimately my question for them might be is like how well are they along their own investment journey? Because oftentimes what you find is that, there are people there that are helpful, that are nice people that might be just starting out too. So I'm not trying to pick on anybody, but you're going to them to trust them to help you try to put yourself in a better financial situation. And oftentimes the person that you're staring across the desk at is in a very similar spot to you. And to me, I look at that and I just think to myself, I don't know if I want to necessarily have the person who's in the same spot as me trying to plan how I'm going to become in a better spot 5, 10, 15, 30 years from now. So these are things that I would recommend you thinking about as you pick in any of these industries. When you go and you're working with someone, you don't have to be rude about it, but you should be asking questions and you should be trying to feel like, hey, this person truly is taking care of me, and they have some experience in this area. So insurance policies, you want to do infinite banking and you're talking to the insurance policy, I might ask them, can you show me your policy that works for infinite banking? And if that person's like, actually, I don't have one, then maybe that's not the best person to be handling your infinite banking policy.
For sure. You're talking credibility.
Rant is over.
You're talking credibility, which is a huge factor in choosing the right person. You definitely want someone who is knowledgeable and trustworthy for sure. And I think you've brought us, full circle back to, thinking about that person who's sitting across the table from me, all those years ago when I started to, get where my investments were going to go, where that money, what should I be doing with that money? What mortgage should I be getting? Like, it's almost like you imagine you could jump in the DeLorean and go back in time and you could talk to that person and say, look, like, these are the things you should think about. So, in this episode, we talked about a few things about kind of rethinking, just think about where those investments lie, and is it the right place for you at this time? Because it can change, right? It can change, in a week, it could change in a month, it could change in 10 years where your situation is different. You should continually rethink that. You could swing it all the way to the other side. We talked about, managing all of this yourself. There are lots of opportunities, lots of learning to do along the way. Like, that's why probably some of you are here listening to this podcast, is you're trying to do this learning alongside us. And there's some recommended reading over on the investedteacher.com/books website. You can get the books there and do some digging in. But then we kind of brought it back to the middle and said, like, what happens if I don't want to go alone and I need an advisor? And we gave you some tips here today to think about what to ask, what to think about, who to consider when trusting these huge financial decisions, with these people and what their incentives are. So, hey, we want to thank you. Thank you for listening here with us on the Invested Teacher podcast once again. And if this is the first time you've listened, then please hit the subscribe button so that you get next week's episode, right? We're putting these out every single week. So hit that subscribe button. If this is, you've listened to a few, you've listened to many, you've listened to all of them, then welcome back, and consider leaving us a rating and review wherever you're listening to this right now, folks. And we'll see you next time.
I love it. Friends, links, resources, transcripts from this episode can be found over on the website, investedteacher.com/episode 29. Hey, maybe it caught your ear that John is doing mortgages and loving life doing it. Hey, if you head over to investedteacher.com, you'll find out more information about that. And my friends, we are so excited to be learning alongside you every single week. So head over to the website, give us a wonderful, wonderful rating and review, and we will see you in the next episode. Until next time, invested students, class dismissed.
Just as a reminder, the content you heard here today is for informational purposes only. You should not construe any such information or other material as legal, tax, investment, financial, or other advice.